Alright folks, welcome back. So if you watched my first video, we went through disassembling the 6P148A compressor, found typically on the 84 to 93 Ford Mustang, as well as some other vehicles. So in this video, we're going to show reassembling the compressor. I've got this mostly cleaned up, did a little work cleaning it up, the grease, corrosion, etc. I'm going to do some final cleanup along the way, but we're at the point now where I'm going to start wearing gloves as well as using lint-free cloths to help clean this up. I've also got a number of lint-free style Q-tips to help clean the grooves, and I'm going to be using this old obsolete Motorcraft refrigerant compressor oil. Now I'm using this compressor, or I have a Mustang that has R12 still in it. So I'm building this system to use R12. So that's why I'm choosing that particular oil. Now, if you're electing to go with R134A, you're going to want to use a different oil. So in that case, you're not going to use what I just showed. You can easily look up online, find out what the best oil is for your application. But the order of operations here is pretty simple. The first thing we do is we reassemble the pistons onto the shaft, and we'll insert that into the rear housing half, and then enclose it with the front housing half to basically sandwich the middle together. From there, we're going to install the rear valve and the rear plates, and then we're going to move to the front where we're going to install the shaft seal, the front plate, and then close this all up. The manifolds can go on last. I may or may not install them in this video, but that's pretty straightforward. Install your new O-rings, 2 screws each, piece of cake. I'm also may or may not install a clutch, which is pretty straightforward here. But let's get going. This may be a long video, which is why I don't want to include everything, especially some things that are redundant if you watched the disassembly video. But here we go. Alright, so before I go into reassembling this compressor, I wanted to touch upon some of the areas to focus on when you're cleaning this up. Mainly where the O-rings are going to sit, as well as some of the details on the shaft seal. And while I was cleaning this up, I kind of realized how this particular compressor failed, or may have failed, or why it was replaced. But basically, when you are refinishing this, you really want to pay attention to the area where the O-ring is going to sit. This is the back plate here, which I've cleaned up a little bit. And the O-ring is going to sit against this particular face here. The O-ring itself is going to sit in a groove here in the back. Now where you want to pay the most attention to is inside this groove here. You want to make sure it's free of debris and no nicks and scratches that are going to cause a leak path. If you do see any corrosion and such extending here, what you want to do is kind of use a piece of Scotch-Brite and kind of clean that area up. What you want to do is remove any gouges that are going to cross the path of where the O-ring sits. Now while you're doing this, if you happen to notice damage that you don't believe you're going to be able to clean up, that may be a case that this compressor may not be a good donor compressor for you, and you may need to seek out parts from another compressor. Overall, this one is in excellent shape. There's some minor stuff to clean up here, but I don't think I'll have an issue with the particular seals and such sealing, especially with the the green O-rings. Now, when you go to insert these O-rings, you're going to want to cover them with a significant amount of oil as you insert them into the groove. That oil is going to help what seals the compressor up. So now we kind of get into the shaft seal. The shaft seal is probably the most important seal on the compressor and the one that tends to fail the most. And in this case, I have reason to suspect that this particular shaft seal failed and was leaking, as you can see here by the electromagnet here, which is completely covered in oil. Now I noticed that the magnet is covered in oil, the coil, but the outer pulley and the hub were not as dirty, so this was essentially leaking from the inside. Now, I realized when I pulled this out that something looked strange. This is the wick that was installed in the front cover here, if you remember. Notice how short it was. I'm going to insert a photo here that shows how I've typically found them. So if you compare that photo to this, you realize that there really wasn't much wick here to begin with. That barely extended out into the housing. Why that matters here? So we'll take a look at how this is a clean magnet that I have. And you basically install them by aligning the alignment pin in there, you can see in the top. And you'll notice here where the wick drops out, since it wasn't so long, it was actually leaking fluid directly into this particular area here. So, with regards to the shaft seal, these shaft seals are two-piece units here. They are comprised of an inner seal, in which you have your O-ring that seals around the outer housing. And then you have your actual shaft seal here, which has a couple components here. Let's see if I can get that to focus. These are carbon ceramic units, and they do have a spring in there that provides a little bit of tension. And the way that they work is that there is a front face here, which you really need to also make sure that there are no defects on. And in fact, since this is a used unit, I'm handling this with my bare hands. But when you go to install your good unit, you're going to want to wear a gloved hand. The oils from your skin can actually etch into the metal or damage the ceramic seal in here. But the way that it works is that this outer plastic ring rides along the front face of that under some tension. Now also you'll notice when you put some tension on this, the inner rubber of the seal actually compresses slightly. That's what helps create the seal. Now, inside the front of this hub here, this is where that O-ring sits here. So there's a nice machined flat surface that runs around the outside. And then if you'll also notice, just beyond that O-ring seal is your weep hole where that wick is inserted. So any refrigerant oils or anything that makes it past these seals are going to collect here and then come out of the bottom, out of this wick assembly here. The shaft seal itself, and I'm getting to the point where I've started cleaning the shaft up so I don't want to handle it. But there is a little notch here on here. So your bearing for your compressor is going to sit on this portion, and your shaft seal is going to seal on this particular piece right here. So when the shaft seal gets installed, I'm just going to take that piece off. You'll notice that there's like a keyed notch there. That's going to align with that particular notch right there. So when you insert this down, again, you're going to do this with a lot of lubricant. And I don't know if it's going to go because I don't have lubricant, so I'm not going to force it. But you're going to basically turn it down and align that notch with that little notch in the shaft there and press it on there. It should spin with the shaft. And while this spins, again, you're going to apply plenty of lubricant to this entire assembly and to the face here so that it can spin around it. This one in my left hand remains stationary, and the shaft spins this against that front face. So the driver for this has a special cup. I don't know if I can get the camera to focus. You can see that the shaft seal has a recess on it. So this driver fits into that recess, so it spins around the outer pocket and avoids touching the area here where the shaft seal rides on. So I know I claimed that this tool was optional, but for that reason alone, making the install easy, you may want to get it. This is an OTC T81P-19628-C. And again, this fits perfectly with an alignment with a small groove around the outside of the shaft seal. It basically fits in like that, allows you to push it in. When you go to install these, and I'm not going to install it here, you want to apply plenty of lubricant here, and this should go in by hand. There's no need to drive it home or ram it. It should easily, if you hold it straight, just push right in and bottom out. And you'll be able to tell from this side that it's bottomed out. But those are some quick notes on shaft seals. Again, the shaft seal, this one is a used one, has a plastic piece here that creates a seal against the front face of that. But what it also seals here is that when this is compressed, this O-ring seal inside, it's not an O-ring, but it's a rubber seal, compresses against the shaft. So since it's doing that, you want to make sure that you come in here, let's see if I can get this to focus, and really make sure that that area where that seal is going to sit, which again is this section here, is perfectly clean and defect-free. If there's any pitting, rust, etc., you're never going to get that to seal. Now is the time to spend the time on this, because all this work that you're doing here is going to depend on how well you can get that interface. So definitely pay attention and take your time and work slowly here. But now I'm going to start to rebuild the compressor. I'm going to finish cleaning up these parts, cleaning up the sealing surfaces, degreasing them. I'm going to use gloves to avoid contamination. And now we're going to go into beginning to rebuild this. So step one is assembling the pistons. Now these are pretty straightforward. Your piston assembly here basically has a recess here. You apply a little oil to these balls and they'll simply hold in the cup there. Now on the shaft, you see I have polished this. So your bearings sit on this portion here and this portion here. And this is where your shaft seal sits. See if I can get that to focus. So as you can see, I did a pretty good job of polishing that up to eliminate all the corrosion as well as nicks and scratches. But I've gone ahead and wiped the shaft down with oil. I'm going to go ahead now and assemble these balls and cups. So again, just a little bit of oil in there. And then you'll find that the ball tends to hold in place there. You actually don't need to force yourself too hard to keep it in place. Simply put them in the groove, rotate them a little bit. Same thing for the cup. Rotate a little bit. Oh, one fell out. It's not going to be perfect, but you should be able to get them roughly assembled without too much trouble. If they fall out, just add a little bit more oil. But the trick here, and I don't know how well this is going to go on camera, is to assemble them all three onto the swash plate and insert them into the rear portion of the housing. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue to assemble these. And again, you'll just want to apply a little bit of oil to get them to stick. And you're probably going to make a mess here, but more oil is good, especially if you're going to not, install this right away. It may sit on a shelf, etc. There's number 2. And here's number 3. Oops. And if they don't stick, just apply a little bit more oil, and that usually does the trick. All right, so I've taken the rear portion here, and to avoid making this video excessively long, I've gone around and pre-lubricated the inside cylinder bores here. I've also applied a generous amount of lubricant to the bearing. So the trick here is, this is the bearing, the side closest to the bearing is the rear, obviously. But the trick here is to assemble the 3 piston ball assemblies onto the swash plate while simultaneously feeding that into this particular unit. Let me go ahead and see if I can try to get that done on camera. All right, as you can see, I did struggle with that a little bit. It's tricky to hold them in such a way that you can insert it, but I found the best way to kind of do it was to get the 2 started, hold them in this position here with the side of the swash plate facing closest to you, and then with one hand put the top one on and then feed it into the cylinder, this cylinder first, followed by the shaft, and then finally by these 2. But the next step here is going to be to clean this groove up really well, apply a lot of lubricant to it, lubricate the cylinders, the actual bearing, and then flip this around and guide that all down there. That'll help basically seal the pistons up into the unit. At that point, we'll flip it over and we'll work on the rear case. So I had to back up because I forgot to mention to install your bearings. Now this is a very important step here. But on each side of the shaft, you have 2 washers and a thrust bearing here. You're going to want to apply lubricant, and preferably before you install it in the housing like I did. They sandwich like this: washer, thrust bearing, and then another washer. Install it with a lot of lubricant here, and they slide onto the shaft right here. Now the piston will probably be in the way, so I'm going to have to work this out. But ideally, you would do that before you install that. Yes, it does make it a little bit more tricky, but I forgot to do that during that step. So make sure you please take care of that. All right, so I've gone ahead and cleaned the groove as well as apply oil. I'm just going to go ahead and oil up this O-ring here. I'm doing it over here just in case if I spill any oil, it falls onto the part. But once I get this all oiled up here, we're just going to come over and insert this into the groove here. Now the oil will help hold it in place. I'm just going to kind of rub the oil in this area here just to keep everything all internally lubricated. But the next part here is to simply flip this over and guide these cylinders into this portion here and close it. Now you're not going to be able to close it all the way because you have those pins there sticking out. You're going to get it close, and then you may need to use your rubber mallet to kind of drive it home. All right, so that went in pretty good. Again, you're not going to really get to be able to close that up all the way. You can probably use the bolts to draw it home, but I would wait till you at least get the rear cover on, and then you can kind of hit on these points to kind of seat it a little bit. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to flip this over, and we're going to install the O-ring here, the valve plate, the 2 pins, and then we're going to install the rear cover plate. All right, so here we are working on the back side. I have the compressor shaft positioned inside a cylinder to hold it up in this position. But you're going to need your rear plate, your 2 dowel pins, which go here, as well as your rear seal and your O-ring. Now I've gone ahead and inserted some oil into the O-ring groove here using a syringe. I've put some in the bearing as well. You're definitely going to want to apply lubricant here. I'm going to put a little bit in the pistons here. This will activate after. I'll run the compressor through a couple times to help try and spread this. But we're going to go ahead and lubricate up the O-ring just to get a nice coat on that and put that into place. Now, one thing I would do here before you put too much oil in is to install these 2 pins. If you actually put oil in that hole, the pin will not go all the way to the bottom of the cylinder. It'll be hydraulically locked. So you need to make sure that those pins, those bores, are cleaned completely through so that the pin may bottom out. Now the pin helps align the rear valve plate. Now I'm partially cleaning this up. I still got a little bit more cleaning to do. But you'll note that when you start disassembling this, there's actually a rear plate on here as well that will separate. There's actually another plate in the front, but as long as you don't remove the 2 bolt assemblies here and remove these rockers, you don't need to mess with that. But on the rear here, it is possible to install this plate backward. You'll see in this case, this is backward installed. So this bolt fits over this particular hole here. And when it's backwards, you'll notice that these slots here, 1, 2, but the third one is misaligned. So that'll be your sign that you need to flip this over and align it this way. So 1, 2, 3 are open, and these fingers are over the valve holes here. Now before you put this together, you're going to want to put a little bit of lubricant on that. Basically smear it on lubricant here, close that, and then flip it over. And what you're going to want to do is install this particular gasket here. This gasket installs in this orientation, but you want to put lubricant oil all over that when you sandwich it down. And then once you do that, you're simply going to lay that flat over the dowels. The dowels go through this hole here and this hole here. But I'm going to go ahead and do that right. Final step on the rear is to install the rear cover plate. Now, it installs in this orientation here. You'll note the alignment pinholes. That's where you're going to align. But if you're looking for a way to kind of hint your wording, and obviously is going to face that direction as this is the top of the compressor. So I typically go around and apply a little bit of lube just to this seal. And I'll rub this in real quick if I can get it to flow. And then just close it up. You also want to apply just a little bit to this particular area here. Typically, more is better when it comes to applying lubricant. And that's it. Rear is installed. Now you can flip it over here and we can work on the front. Alright, so here we've flipped it over here to the front now. Now I've gone ahead and started to do the same thing. I've applied oil into the groove, applied oil to the bearing, and a little bit on the surfaces of the pistons here to try to give them some lubricant. So your next step is to install the top valve, and that assembles the same as the rear one. There's another plate, so here's the valve plate here. Again, same type of plate on the rear. It'll install two different ways. Usually you can see the wear marks here where the ports here have rested. But in case you're wondering here, we're going to position this hole and this screw at the 6 o'clock position, and the plate covers that as so. The fingers cover these valves and your ports are open here. You're going to sandwich this with a little oil and then install it in place. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up, oil it up, and get it in place. I've got my gasket and my O-ring ready to go. So at this point here, the compressor is pretty much assembled. We would have to install now the front cover here, but this is where things kind of get a little tricky because the front seal is part of that cover. So we're going to have to go ahead now and install that front seal. We're going to drive the seal into the top cover, and then we're going to install the seal in the shaft. After that point, you can simply drop this down here and we can go ahead and bolt it up. All right, so we've gone ahead, we're prepped to install the shaft seal here. So the seal comes sealed up, and as you can see, most importantly, use gloves. I've got a brand spanking new set of gloves on here. So we're gonna go ahead and open this up, and this is the portion we want to install first because we're going to install that into this part. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and prep this first by coming in here with a little bit of oil and making sure that this is well lubricated here. Again, when I go to install this, there should be very little effort to get this to go down. And it's still going to seep down there, but that's okay. We're going to pop this out here if I can. May have to do this off camera. All right, so here we are with the new shaft seal. And as you see, it's a nicely machined part, and it does have a groove that will accept that tool. But before I install that, I'm going to lubricate the O-ring up pretty well. Again, this is what's going to ultimately seal the shaft against the outside elements. So if this is leaking, you're going to have problems. So I'm going to install it on this tool like so. And you'll see it does stay in place. And then we're simply going to invert, fit it in here, and this should drive home by hand. And as you can see, it did. All right, and there it is fully installed. You can actually see where it stopped. It doesn't actually bottom out. There's a little bit of a gap. Remember how I said that you're going to have a little bit of a gap so that oil can leak out there. But once you get that installed, you're going to want to make sure that this area here is well lubricated because the next shaft seal is going to seal, get right against this face. All right, so I have the two shaft seals here. Now this is the original one from Nippon-Denso that was originally installed. And here's the replacement one here. Now you can see it's a little bit different construction. Unfortunately, you just can't get these anymore. In fact, the last compressor I did, it looked similar to this design anyway. But as you can see, I'm using gloves and I have a lot of oil on here. I'm going to lubricate this very well here But this is the side that's going to go down. There's a little flat here that's going to align with a flat somewhere on the shaft here, which you want to identify first. In this case, it is on this side here. But once you've lubricated that, you're going to slide that down onto the shaft until it bottoms out and engages. So I'm going to go ahead and lubricate that and install it. Alright, so once you have it in place, you can actually feel a very positive click when that thing is in place. Before we install the cover, we're going to apply another bead of lubricant here. We're going to make sure that this gasket is well oiled up. We're going to apply some more oil to the top of the shaft seal and more oil to the top of that, and then sandwich that all together. Alright, so I've gone ahead and started installing the bolts here. Now the bolts you're going to want to use brand new crush washers. These are the extra ones. Fortunately, you're going to get a pack of 6 with your reseal kit as well as your shaft seal. So you should actually have 12 washers total. You only need 6. But you're going to want to go ahead and install 1 washer per bolt. Now I like to install stainless hardware on my compressor. But the closest I could find is 150 millimeters, so it's a little bit longer. You can't use the longer bolt though, you must trim it. So what I found the best thing to do is to install a nut on the stainless bolt, run it down to approximately the same length. So you're going to chop out maybe a little less than 1/4 of an inch or so. Use a hacksaw, cut it down, file it, and then at that point you can install your new stainless bolts, which look much better. But I'm going to go ahead and install this final bolt. Again, you're going to use your new crush wash. These are sealing washers because these holes are open to the internals of the compressor. So if your sealing washers are not in great shape, you're going to have a bad seal there. This is another potential leak point. Torque rating, torque spec in the manual that I've linked is 18 to 19 foot-pounds, and you're going to want to go into a star-shaped pattern as you do that. Now, again, one final thing to do here is reinstall this particular wick here. It's pretty simple. It just simply pushes in from the bottom, and you might need a tool to do it. And then you bend this tab downward. So you're going to actually push it in through this hole here, and then bend this tab inward down. Now, at this point, I have not installed the key on the shaft. I find that I like to put the clutch disc in place and then tap that in with a punch and then pull it out. If you clean the key up well, if you get a sandpaper, Scotch-Brite, and clean it up really well, and you have plenty of lubricant, I've cleaned the shaft, the key slot on the shaft as well. I find it goes in without a problem here. So your next step here is going to be to clean up these ports. So we're going to install the manifolds. Now again, buy new hardware, but you don't need to do that. I'll have the specs of that hardware down there in the description. But basically, same thing that we've been doing here. Clean these up. We're going to put some oil in the grooves. We'll install the O-rings with a little bit of oil. And then we will bolt this all down. So I usually like dipping the O-ring in and then kind of rubbing it in. I find that gives it a good seal. Oops, I don't spill everything. You're going to make a mess. I don't think I've ever been able to do this cleanly, but I guess more oil is a good thing. Probably want to do what I've done here and assemble yourself a nice cleaning workspace. It's also probably a hell of a lot easier when you're not trying to make a video at the same time. But I managed to pull this off somewhat okay. But you're going to position these, making sure that the O-rings do not fall out, just like so. You can go ahead and replace this. This is a high pressure blow-off valve. I want to say that it pops off around 400 psi, maybe 450, but don't quote me on that. You can also replace your valve stem core, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. You will need, when it's discharged like this, you can do it rather easily. But when the system has refrigerant in it, there's a special tool that you need. These do leak. I've found that they frequently leak. But you're supposed to install the cap on there. The cap has a little bit of a rubber gasket on it that helps seal that up. You really don't want to leave these open like this because you're essentially always going to have a leak there. Now the manual does not state a torque spec on these bolts here. So I find that I kind of get them snug evenly and then just go down pretty tight. You can look on the side and see when the O-ring's compressed. That's really what your goal here is, to compress that O-ring and create a great seal. But I don't think you need to over torque it. In fact, they are the same thread pitch as the main body bolts, and those are specified to be 18 to 19 foot-pounds. So that's probably a good starting point here. I'm just going to snug these up by hand, and then I'm going to come back later on with a torque. Changing valve cores, again, if it's off the bench, you don't need to do anything fancy. They have little tools that'll easily take it off. But if the system is under pressure, like on the car, you're going to need something like this, the Appian 1/4-inch valve core removal tool. And the way that this works is that it has your tool for moving your core, but it allows you to basically pull the core, unscrew it, pull the core out, and isolate the system that's under pressure. Then you can simply remove it from the back, take your core out, install a brand new core, screw it in this way, put it back in there. Sorry, you would open your valve, put it back in, screw your core in, and then pull it off the tool. It's pretty convenient. Now, if you're like me and you like NOS parts, your part number for your core is D2OZ-19D701-A. Good luck finding one. I don't think you need to go NOS on that, but that part may be cross-referenced to something new. But you can also go with the Santec MT0637, which is a 4-pack or 5-pack of new valve cores. But I'll go ahead and show how to replace this real quick. You don't need this tool. Any valve core tool can be used. Now these are leak paths. You'll see if I can come in real close here. There is a portion of, if I can get the focus, rubber gasket here that creates a seal. Apply a little lube, install that, let that seat. Alright, so I got my core ready, but I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate how this tool is used as if this was a compressor that is on the car. So the way it works is you're going to pull this plunger all the way back. Now the plunger has what grabs the core, and you're going to thread it onto the 1/4-inch fitting here. You're going to thread it in until it's snug. You can see it makes a seal. And then you're going to lower this down and turn it until you can feel it kind of bite the core. It might take a little trial and error to get the feel of where it is, but you're going to want to just turn clockwise to unscrew the core once you actually get it bit. There you go. So once you feel that it's unthreaded all the way, just simply pull the plunger all the way back. Now on the car, the entire system will be under pressure. So what you're going to want to do is close this valve here. Now at that point, you can unscrew the back and your valve core comes out with it. So this one, it's a little bit loose. It's probably okay, but I'm going to change it because it's so many years old. So really it's reverse. You're going to want to install that into the fingers and get it to where it can bite. And then you'll apply some oil to that. You don't really need much, but you want to create a seal. And then you're going to come back in here and thread this back in like so. And then you're going to open the valve. Again, this would be under pressure on the car. So once you open the valve, now the entire cylinder is filled with that refrigerant. You're going to want to push that all the way down to the bottom and then begin threading it in. This is screwing the valve core into the actual compressor. But you will get to a point where it stops. And at that point, you just simply pull back and you're all set. Thread that off and you have a new valve core in place. It's as simple as that. That's an easy way of changing on the car. Now the high pressure line, there isn't a tool to do that. At least I'm not aware. All right, so that concludes this video. Hopefully what I've shown you here helps you if you decide to rebuild your compressor yourself. Now I've noticed these are going for maybe $300 for a reman compressor. And I did this for maybe $30 in parts and maybe another 20 or so in materials. The O-ring kit shipped was maybe 20 bucks, and the shaft seal was maybe 15 bucks shipped. And then this probably took, I probably could have consolidated down to a couple of hours plus cleaning time and painting time. So really it wasn't too big of a deal to go ahead and rebuild this compressor. I'm not going to show installing the clutch assembly. There's plenty of information out there. It's pretty straightforward at this point, to be honest. Again, you'll notice I did not install the shaft key. That's probably the one part that I've left off. I typically do that when I install the clutch. But anyway, hope this video has helped you out. Thank you very much for watching.